Hello, everybody. My name is Jess Graff. I'm a mixed media artist and educator. I like to work with all sorts of different kinds of art materials, and I use those materials to build so many different things. Today, I'm really excited because I get to start working with you all to build some different architectural forms. And when I say architectural forms, what I mean are things like buildings, things like rooms inside of buildings. So we'll start out this process together, building some small rooms, getting the structures of those things put together. And then as we go through this series of 4 classes, you'll be able to come up with your own ideas, experiment a lot, and build the kind of room or building that seems best to you. So you get to be the designer, both today and in these classes as we go forward together. Another thing I want to tell you about is that we're using different kinds of recycled materials. So when I say recycled materials, I mean things you might put in the recycling usually, and also other things that can't go in the recycling, things that we might think of as garbage. So we're going to look at those things and explore those things together and come up with what else they could be. So if you see something like a junk mail envelope, and I've got lots of junk mail envelopes for us to look at, instead of thinking, that's just garbage, you can start thinking, what can I make out of that? So we're going to go ahead and get started. I want to show you some different textures and patterns. So we'll switch over to the camera that we're looking at my hands, and you'll get to see I've got lots and lots of different kinds of junk mail envelopes. So you can see a lot of these envelopes have different textures, different patterns, different colors. A lot of them are in blues and blacks. You can see even when you first open up that envelope at the top, you can see those different colors and those different patterns. And those really remind me of all sorts of different things in a home or in another building. They might remind me of the tiles on a floor. They might remind me of some wallpaper, or maybe the textures on fabric. And you might have lots of different textures on junk mail envelopes near you as well. These things that we think, we're just going to throw that away. So what I want you to do is make sure you can get some materials. You're going to have a chance to collect things like envelopes, if you've got any envelopes near you. You also probably want to make sure you have something sticky, something like maybe tape, or maybe you've got some liquid school glue. That would be a really helpful thing to have. Or you could even use something like a glue stick. That would be really helpful. I also have this tool that I really like called glue dots. And glue dots are great because they're kind of like tape or little bits of glue. They look like this. You see those little dots there? Really, really small. You kind of peel them up. Sticky tack might also work if that's something you've got. So this is a great opportunity for you to find some papers that will work for you, to find something sticky, whether that's glue dots or tape or school glue or those glue sticks. Whatever you've got will work. You might want to try a couple if you've got more than one, just to experiment with different options. You also may want something like scissors. Scissors are going to be really helpful for cutting different shapes to add to your floors. You might also be someone that likes to have a pencil or a ruler. You might want to measure out how big you need your pieces to be before you cut them. Up to you. You might just take a look with your eyes and decide how big something is and cut it out. That's also an option. Whatever feels right to you as you're creating is just fine. Another thing you should also gather while you're starting this process of gathering all of your materials is things like old newspaper, or maybe you've got something like pages from an old magazine. I've got some pages from old magazines here. These have kind of interesting textures or interesting patterns that I think I might like to add to a house later. I get lots of art magazines. That's the kind that I usually have. But sometimes I get things like architecture magazines. Any kind of magazine will work. Even if it's just because you've got some interesting textures and colors, that's just fine. So go ahead and get those materials, get yourself set up, and we'll get started. I'll just wait for just a moment to let you have a minute to get some junk mail or some papers that you can work with. And I'll talk a little bit more about these envelopes, these junk mail envelopes. Usually when grown-ups are getting these junk mail envelopes, they don't really want what's inside of them. And that's why they're called junk mail. But we can use a lot of these things to make all sorts of beautiful art. And that's true with all sorts of different kinds of materials. So anytime you are anywhere, you can make art. You just have to look at the materials near you a little bit differently. So if I'm looking at these envelopes, I can notice a couple things about them. If you've got an envelope like this and it's open, you can notice that many of these junk mail envelopes have these little flaps. Got little flaps. They've got kind of a fold. Some of them have these little, what are called windows. And we're going to actually use those like windows in these envelopes too. So we're going to leave those there. We don't need to rip them out. If they're already ripped out, that's okay. No problem. If you want to make sure you're opening an envelope in a way that you're going to be able to use all of the pieces of it, you can go ahead and gently peel those up. You don't want to pull too fast. If you pull really, really fast, what happens is it's more likely to rip. And while that's fine, it's harder to use then. If it does rip, no problem. That's okay. As we're building, sometimes things don't go the way that we plan. Sometimes things don't go the way we hope. And that's okay. That's just part of creating and exploring and experimenting. So just be kind to yourself. If something doesn't go the way that you hoped, that's okay. Remember to be kind to yourself. All right, so I'm just pulling these pieces. If your pieces get kind of stuck like that, yeah, you can just undo it. I'm going to do the other side too. So just going nice and slow, pulling those things apart. If I'm noticing a spot's getting a little thin, I can put my finger on the inside and I can pull out that way, little by little by little. Again, if it does rip, that's okay. That happens. No worries. All right, so when I open up that envelope, you can see that it's got sort of a top flap. That's the part that would have closed the envelope. You can see if we put that back together. That's the part that closes the envelope. Then we've got this part, and then we've got these two little flaps. These two little flaps are going to be really helpful for us when we're building our houses or whatever other kind of buildings we're interested in. So I'm going to show you a picture here. This is another little house that I built, or a little living room that I built out of these papers. So you can see the envelopes are here. And there's those windows that I was talking about, those little windows in the envelopes, just like these windows in the envelopes. And you can see this is two envelopes. This is the top edge of one envelope, just like this is the top edge of one envelope. And this is the top edge of another envelope. And in the middle, in the corner, is where those things join together. Now, everything in this picture that you can see is made out of recycled materials. These are all things that someone might have thrown away. But I thought, what could I turn those into? What could I build with those? You can see this little tiny piece of art on the wall. That's just made out of a used stamp. So you might have some junk mail that has stamps on it. Like this one has a stamp on it. And you might decide later on to cut that out and put that on the wall of your little building or your house. You might decide to make things out of paper. These pillows are just made out of different pieces of paper. These floor pieces too. This is all just little pieces of paper that I cut out and put on the floor of this. So to make our walls, we're going to go ahead and pick two envelopes, two of those junk mail envelopes. We'll see what we can find that will work for us. I kind of like these two blue ones, so I think I might try those. So what I'm going to do is collect my pieces, and I'm going to put them next to each other, just like that, lining up those edges together. Now I can see which one looks better to me. Excuse me. I think that that's kind of nice. I like this one, this flap on top, better than this flap on top. You'll kind of have to decide what's going to work best for you. But I like this one. This part is kind of the trickiest because you see how my paper just flops right over? That's okay. It just makes this a little tricky. So just be kind to yourself as you figure it out. I want to line up these two little folds. Can you see how those folds are lined right up? Yeah. So we're going to go ahead and get those glued. Now, again, if you have something like school glue, you could use that. Remember that a little goes a long way. So just a little school glue on there, that'd be one way to stick it together. If you've got something like a glue stick, that could be another way. So let's give that a try. So if you have something like a glue stick that you want to use, it's a good idea to leave that kind of flat, but lift up that little tab. See how that little tab flaps? And you can get a little glue right on that little flap. Get that glue on that flap, a nice even amount of glue. If you're using glue, remember that your piece is still going to be a little bit weak until the glue dries, and that's okay. All right, you can press that down. You just don't want to move it around so much while it's still wet because it's more likely to fall apart. But guess what? If it falls apart, no big deal. Just glue it back together. Give it a moment. All right. So once I've got that first bit glued, I can kind of test it. I can fold it a little bit and see, is that working? Is that able to fold so that that crease lines up there? We're kind of making a little box, kind of like a little box with our pieces here. You kind of see how that's working. And you're going to want to glue also where it overlaps here. You see how my hand is kind of on the inside there? Now this is the trickiest part, I think, to make sure that it all ends up nice and square. So if it's not working out at first, that's okay. Just take it apart, put it back together. No big deal. If you're using something like the tape, you can do that too. Excuse me. I think I breathed a little bit of dust in. So tape works just the same as the glue. No problem. Can you see how I've got that? It's kind of flopping around a little bit. There we go. We can line that up. And you can tape it so that you can see the tape, or you can make a little roll of tape. So I've got one side that's sticky and one side that's smooth. And I can fold it around so that the sticky part's on the outside. So now I've got a really sticky circle, a little sticky tube, and I could put that sticky tube underneath. You see how I'm putting that underneath where it overlaps? And I can smush it down. There you go. And I was thinking too about where my windows would be. So I knew that I wanted my floor to be solid without any holes in it. And I knew that I wanted my windows to be on the side so that we could kind of look out of them. We'll switch to my face again here. And you can see I've got another one that I've been working on here. So you can see same thing. Again, two different envelopes. They've got the flaps over here. The flaps have been glued. The bottom has been glued or taped. Again, it doesn't matter which you use. Whatever you have near you is a-okay, no problem. What the outside looks like is this. So that corner has that little other flap, right? And you could put a piece of tape on that. You could glue that as well so it doesn't flop around. I'll show you on that other one too. So see, I haven't glued this flap yet. So on the outside, it's still flapping around. So I want to glue that. That'll make it a little bit stronger. But this is what we're looking at so far. This is what it's looking like so far. So kind of that nice square shape so that we'll be able to create a room, kind of like I had in that picture to begin with. You can see the corner or the middle there the corner. So now that we've got that basic shape, we can switch back to my hands and we can come up with how we would like to add to our floor. So you can think about what kind of room are you building? Are you building a room in a house? Is this something like a bedroom or a kitchen? Or is this something like a business? Is this a store? Is it a grocery store? Is it going to be something like a doctor's office or a school? I don't know. That's up to you. That's entirely up to your creativity. So you get to decide. So as you're starting to think about what kind of business or what kind of room you want this to be, you want to make more of a floor here. So to make that floor, you can think about that first one that I have over here and think, what other textures and shapes do I have of those envelopes? So I've got another envelope here that has kind of an interesting, different pattern. It's really different from this one that I have, and I think it might stand out a little bit. This one's already a little bit ripped. Oh, that's okay. I can just open it the rest of the way and see what I have to work with here. You could cut this, you could tear this. If you tear it, you get more of that wiggly line, up to you. Or I could come in with my scissors and open it up that way. Opening, opening, opening. Yeah. Open it all the way. Just ripping it open. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. That's an interesting shape. And maybe I don't like that it has these wiggly lines. Maybe you have a piece near you that has wiggly lines too. Maybe you like those wiggly lines, or maybe you want them to be nice and straight. If you want them to be nice and straight, you can get out your scissors and cut them. You could also, if you're somebody that likes your lines to be really, really straight, you could get something like a pencil and a ruler and draw that line. Maybe you don't have a ruler near you, but you have something like a box and it's got a straight edge. So you could also line that up and use that box, hold that box down to make your straight line. I don't know if you can see that from where you are, but I made a nice straight line. So you can use other materials too to trace around. Maybe you might find that you want a round shaped rug and you can find something that's round near you. I could trace on the inside of this to make a circle to cut out. Or I could trace on the outside of something. I could trace on the outside of my glue bottle even to make that shape and then cut that out. Up to you, whatever you can imagine is just fine. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out to make kind of a big square or a big rectangle as I start adding to the floor of my building here. Again, if it rips, oh, that's okay. I can just put that aside, come back to it later. You might decide that you want to use lots of different materials to make the floor. You can think about tiles. Some floors have tiles. Some floors are wood. Some floors are carpet. Some floors are cement. Maybe you have a completely different idea of what could cover the floor of the room that you're building. I think I'm going to make mine into sort of a bedroom space. So I might think about all the things that I'll need to build in order to make mine into a cozy bedroom. What do you think? What kinds of pieces of furniture? What kinds of flooring could I have? I might also think about things like curtains. Maybe I have a room that needs curtains. That's an option. So you can start kind of arranging these things. Oh, maybe I like that in the corner there. What else could I do? What other shapes do I have? Maybe I feel like I want to add more pieces of that same texture, that same color. Or maybe I'm looking at that and I'm saying, oh, that didn't turn out how I wanted it to. That's okay. We're just going to keep trying things, keep experimenting. Remember, it's okay for things to not work out. It's okay to try something and have it not go the way that we planned. Just remember to be kind to yourself and keep trying. If it's frustrating, you can just sigh it out and then try a different thing or try again. Up to you. Sometimes, even if you've been doing art for years and years and years and years. There will be times where you feel frustrated, and that's okay. That's just part of being a human and trying things out. The important thing is to just keep going and try again. All right, I've decided I would like to use more of this paper. So I can notice that this also has lines on it. So I could just cut along those lines. If you're finding that the corners of your building that you're building, these corners here, if you're finding that it's too floppy for you, you can just add a little bit more tape or a little bit more glue or kind of squish it in there. You want to make sure that if you're using the liquid glue, that it's not running down. If you're finding that it's feeling really wet, if you touch the corner there, you might just want to set this part aside for a little while and come back to it until it's had a chance to dry. Because when the glue is wet, that's when it's at its weakest. All right, I'm going to keep cutting out some pieces for my flooring here, just like I did for that other house. Cutting, cutting, cutting. Moving the pieces I don't need out of the way for now. So I can start to figure out how these things fit together. If I have an edge that I don't really like, I can always tuck that underneath. Just hide it. They start to look a little bit more like they go together, or like they're part of the same piece too. So I could choose to tape these down. I could choose to glue them down. If I'm gluing or taping, I want to make sure I'm just putting the glue or the tape on top of the other pieces of paper, right? If I were to put the glue or the tape in this kind of hole where I have my picture, but you probably have your table or other surface that you're working on, you'll end up with your whole thing stuck to the table, or stuck to the ground, or stuck to whatever you're working on. So try to keep track of what you're adding the glue or tape to, and make sure it's always paper to paper, paper to paper, over here to paper to paper. I'd add here, but nothing sticky in this hole, because it would just get stuck. And that would make it a little bit trickier to do what I want to do. Now, as I've added that, I'm thinking, maybe I want to try a different kind of floor too. Maybe I want something like a rug. Maybe it's a good time to come back to my old magazine pages. Maybe this is a good time to think about that. Now, you can have things that look like traditional rugs, or you could find maybe there's some flowers somewhere in your papers that you can find. This is a little picture that was in one of the pages in one of my magazines. Maybe I'll cut that out and see, maybe that becomes a rug, or maybe that becomes a curtain. Up to you. You can figure it out. So in these last couple of minutes, you can think about what's going to work for you to set up the flooring of your house or your room. And as you are working on that, you can also start your process of collecting interesting little bits of things, interesting small things, whether that's bottle caps or other things. And I'll move this aside here so you can see that picture again. So really, by the next class, if you can get your walls set up and you can get interesting things covering the floor set up, you'll be in a good spot to be able to add other things, other furniture, and other decorations like picture frames and things. And we'll talk about all of that at the next class. All right, so thank you all for tuning in. It's been really fun to create. I know this part seemed like it went really, really fast, and it seems like we don't have a whole lot done yet, but don't worry, we'll have plenty of time to work on it. And if you want to get started ahead of time working on those different shapes, you're welcome to do that as well, to create an interesting little building, an interesting little room. And you are the artist, so you get to choose. You're the designer, you get to choose. All right, thank you all for tuning in, and I'll see you on Wednesday for the next class. Thank you, bye.